Welcome to Shareholders of a Better World, brought to you by TBLI Group. At TBLI Group, we have an established reputation as an organization dedicated to building the ecosystem of Welcome from our studio in Amsterdam, and we're incredibly honored to have Dr. Melanie Rieback, a superstar whose business is basically hacking into banks, has a huge organization. I was really very impressed. If you want to introduce yourself, just type in the chat to the right. If you have a question, put that in there too. Melanie will give a short introduction as to who she is and what she does, and particularly about alternatives to the Silicon Valley business model, which we always hear about as the only way for success. Melanie, thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much also for inviting me. Yeah, sorry also for being a minute or two late. I just had a situation that I was busy resolving, but I am done with that now, and I'm really very grateful to be here to speak with all of you. So I'm here to talk today about the Silicon Valley model, what some of the problems are with it, and ways in which we can do things better. So from what I understand from many of you, you're interested in impact investment. And so many of you, I guess, are also already involved with doing things for a better world. What I can tell you about myself is that I am the CEO and co-founder of Radically Open Security, which is a 6.5-year-old social enterprise in the computer security consultancy space. We have roughly 40 people that are working for us. We have over 100 customers, and we also have won quite a few different awards. 50th Most Innovative SME in the Netherlands. CIO magazine called me the most innovative IT leader of the Netherlands, and also the European Commission called me one of the 9 most innovative women in the European Union with their EU Women Innovation Prize. So we've had a lot of successes for our both our business model as well as also for the business itself that we're running. So we are a company of ethical hackers, as Robert pointed out. Some of our customers, that we do hacking for include Google, Mozilla, the Open Tech Fund in the United States, but we also are working with the European Commission. We actually just hit the news about 3 weeks ago, actually on the first page of the online papers, for a penetration test that we did on the Corona Melder, which is the COVID-19 contact tracing app in the Netherlands. We've also done security auditing on for the European Commission of COVID-19 contact tracing apps, including Protogo in Poland, Immuni in Italy, Trace Together in Singapore, and we via the European Commission are currently doing testing on the Google Apple Exposure Notification Framework, as well as the interoperability API. for the European Union. So we're doing some really high profile jobs with our security company. And, beyond the big corporations and national customers, we also, really serve a whole lot of different markets, including the not-for-profit market. So as much as we work with really large companies, we also do not-for-profit work at on cost price basis for NGOs, nonprofits, and civil society. Just quite simply because a lot of NGOs or small civil society groups, they come to us and they have the scariest attacker models and they have almost no budget. So, I mean, literally like some of these like little free speech group in Iran, I mean, they have no budget, but they literally have national governments after them. So, in a sense, it's kind of like, we use the big commercial customers, to get the flywheel spinning. But then once the wheel is spinning, then we can use that engine to also service the little guys, and also basically on a zero margin basis. Another thing beyond being a social enterprise, we go a little bit further in that we also donate all of our profits to charity. I know that sounds weird, like you're thinking all your profits, how do you keep your doors open? Here's the story. We are registered as something called a fiscal fundraising institution. In Dutch, it's called a fiscaal fondswervende instelling. What this is it is a archaic tax construction from the Dutch church. So what this means is that churches sometimes want to do commercial spin-offs. Those spin-offs then raise money in some way, shape, or form, and then that money goes with a tax benefit back to the church again. A famous example of this in the Netherlands is the language institute called Regina Caeli, otherwise known as the Nuns of Vught. So basically, the nuns started the Language Institute. The Language Institute is independently operating, pretty good quality. It's where our queen in the Netherlands learned her Dutch. And then the profits go in full back to the nuns again. That's how this works. So we decided, well, we can do the same thing. We're going to make our commercial spinoff a security consultancy company, and we are going to make our church the NLNet Foundation. And the NLNet Foundation is a Dutch foundation. It's about 20 years old. And they are basically, they give subsidy to different organizations, including, open source, digital rights initiatives, and basically anything for a better internet. So projects like GNU, the EFF, Tor, Jitsi, DNSSEC, WireGuard, a lot of really well-known projects that, make the world better. This is the kind of thing that the NLNet Foundation supports. So what this means is that 90% of our profits go to the NLNet Foundation. The last 10% that we don't donate is our cash flow buffer, because of course we need a cash flow buffer to run a business, and basically this works. When I talk about profits, I talk about the money that we have left over after everyone has been paid. So basically, look, I'm running a business here. In fact, I'm running quite a active, security company with 40 people. So, we receive a lot of money from our customers. We also pay quite a bit of money to our pen testers and other security staff and other kinds of staff. And then we, it's sort of the money that we bring in minus the money that we pay out that we consider to be our profits. Also, I can reinvest, into my company. So we use that to do things like build automation, create software, invest in processes and building. Basically all of the necessary things that we need to actually get a running company. And basically the money that we donate is basically sort of what would otherwise, I guess, be dividended out of a company. It's basically the money that we can afford to miss. So that's basically what I mean when I say profits. But of course, the word profit in and of itself is anyhow really confusing because, trying to prototype a quote unquote not-for-profit company, which is essentially what we're trying to do, people get really confused because as soon as you say not-for-profit company, they're like, what? You don't have customers? You work for free? What does that mean? And the difficulty really comes in the fact that the word profit is ambiguous. So the word profit actually has a double meaning. One meaning of the word profit is essentially margin on turnover. So basically, it's that amount that I can reinvest into the actual, building of my company. The second meaning of the word profit is extraction. And that's basically the amount that is sort of unnaturally pulled out of a company to go to shareholders, investors, quite simply the 1%. That also is considered to be profit. But the problem is that because both meanings are embedded into the same word, it completely confuses us. Because if somebody says, well, of course my company needs to be profitable, it sounds logical. But, the question I then have is, okay, but what meaning are you talking about of the word profit? Because the margin on turnover, yes, that's completely essential to run a business. But extraction, not only is that not necessary, but in fact, it's actually harmful. It's detrimental to a company because anything that pulls financial value out of a company is going to make it less competitive on the market, quite simply. Now, I thought, when I first started this, that I was, being original with these ideas. Turns out, much smarter people beat me to it. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with an economist whose name is Mohammed Yunus. So he's a Nobel Prize winning Bangladeshi economist who invented microfinance. And he also started something called the Grameen Bank, and he also wrote some really good books, including Imagine a World Without Poverty and Building Social Business. So Yunus created this concept called social business. And the way in which he defines it, he says, and I quote, that social business is no dividend companies for solving human problems. So the world jumped on Yunus's ideas, and they said, solving human problems, yes, but no dividend? That doesn't quite work for us, And thus evolved the social enterprise ecosystem that involves such things as impact investors and selling your B corporation to Unilever. Um, you know, I understand right now that I'm talking to basically a conference full of impact investors. So, I'm not basically, saying this sort of to attack anyone because I think that everybody who is in the impact ecosystem has very good intentions. But the problem is that the whole Silicon Valley ethic has really infiltrated the social enterprise ecosystem, I think, without our even realizing it. Because if you think about the double meaning of that with the word profit, I mean, this is the system. We like to talk about the system, but actually, when you consider such double meanings, the fact that people get confused because you can't separate out in your head extraction from margin on turnover that's actually needed to run a business. This is exactly that system. That's staring it straight in the face. And it's built into our semantics. That this ideology is built into the most pure of business concepts. The confusion in the word profit also makes anything that's not for profit confusing. Because as soon as you start talking about things that are not for profit, like NGOs, then the natural assumption is, oh, but we're not allowed to have margin on turnover. Same thing. The problem is the extraction. The problem is not that they're not allowed to have revenue or that they're not allowed to have a sustainable business model. I mean, any NGO needs to be able to have some kind of a sustainable way of financially supporting its future of its activism. If NGOs are not financially viable in the long run, I mean, the problem really with NGOs is that they are susceptible to something that is called the subsidy trap. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the concept of the poverty trap. So the poverty trap, so basically if you have a poor person and then they're on welfare, and then the problem is that the moment that this poor person wants to pull themselves out of poverty, they're gonna do something like get a job or perhaps start a business, anything like that. However, the problem is that the moment that they start a business or get a job, this income disqualifies them from getting their their welfare check. So they basically wind up falling into this rock and a hard place that it's sort of like, you're darned if you do, you're darned if you don't. And they really need to be able to earn a substantial amount to really be able to pull themselves out of this poverty trap. Now, it turns out that the subsidy trap is exactly the same thing. So you've got these NGOs, and they receive subsidies or donations from third parties. Now, oftentimes, if these, the problem is in the current world, and the last 4 years most certainly. I mean, there's been this spread of populist politicians, and it's not just in the States, but it's in Europe, it's all over the place, it's all over the world. And the problem is these subsidies are drying up. So NGOs are realizing that, we can't count on subsidies like we used to, and we also can't count on donations like we used to. So they're realizing that we need to start, having other more sustainable income streams. However, the moment that an NGO decides to do something like spin up a company to basically help produce some revenue to help keep the NGO alive, this NGO is at risk of losing their charitable status. And the problem is they need this charitable status to be able to have donations be tax exempt. So this is not a small deal. So this is sort of the problem. The moment that an NGO starts moving towards a sustainable business model, then the government basically, or whoever, or whatever, whoever's giving them subsidy, basically slaps down on them and says, no, NGO, you're not supposed to be, commercializing. But this again puts them in this rock and this hard place that they are being forced to remain dependent upon donations in a time where it's obvious that all of this is a lot less than it was. And certainly now with the COVID-19 crisis, I don't see any perspective of this changing. So it's not just NGOs that are susceptible to the subsidy trap. There's other groups that also have a similar problem. The cultural sector, same thing. If artists or musicians receive cultural subsidies, the moment that an artist decides to do something like start a company, preferably so that that artist is able to do something like, say, feed themselves, or without maybe having to, clean houses or something to be able to make ends meet. The problem is that as soon as they start a business, then whoever is giving them that cultural subsidy then says, yeah, but dear artist, we're giving you a cultural subsidy. You're not supposed to be starting a business. So the cultural sector is susceptible to this. Academics face exactly the same problem. So if you're at the university receiving grants, whether it's a science foundation or, the moment you start a company, then you basically have to start dealing with technology transfer offices at the university. And I can tell you from past experience, I used to be an assistant professor of computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam. And at one point in time, I was trying to valorize some research that I had in the RFID security space. The first thing that happened was the TTO basically swooped in and was like, okay, whatever you do, we need you to sign this document that says, that you're going to give us a certain percentage of any company that you ever start, ever. At which point I looked at it and I'm like, what? I'm not signing this. And of course, I'm glad I didn't. But it was ridiculous that they even asked. But nonetheless, another group that tends to fall into the subsidy trap as well is open source projects, because they also tend to receive subsidies to work on sort of these little pet projects. But they're so idealistic that the moment that they start thinking, oh, commercialize what? Money's evil. Why should we do this? And this is sort of, I think, the heart of the problem, that the exact people who should be starting companies are not. And in part, this is also, I think, a cultural problem. Because, we're sort of separated into silos. You've got the business people sort of on one side, and then you've got, the artists and activists, and creatives sort of on the other side. And both sides are kind of like looking suspiciously at each other. But what we don't realize is that actually those two sides need each other. I mean, the rationalists, so like the scientists, the technologists, the business people, we need artists and creatives and activists to understand that there's more than just 9 to 5 jobs and maximizing shareholder value. um, while at the same time, the artists and the creatives and the activists also need us in equal measure to get them to understand that yes, you need a business model. You need to give a solid foundation for your art or for your activism to make sure that it can be sustainable for the long term. But unfortunately, this is something that by and large is ignored. If you think about incubators, for example, I'm a computer scientist, and I've been fortunate enough that when I started Radically Open Security, we went through an incubation program at the Amsterdam Center for Entrepreneurship, which is basically the local incubator that belongs to the Amsterdam University system. Um, I was able to partake of this incubation program for free. It was basically subsidized by the Dutch government, and it was most certainly very helpful in enabling me to be able to create my startup. Now, the problem is that if you think about it, like creative artists, for example, or activists, what incubators are there for those people? I mean, I know a very small number of initiatives where they have been trying to incubate uh, creative artists. And the weird thing is, I mean, there's no subsidy for these at all. So basically, they're trying to actually just pay really large entrance fees, to these creative artists, thus, causing them to get into debt, and just telling them, look, it's an investment in your future, you should pay this, when, those of us who actually need it less, the business people, the computer scientists, the technologists, we get all of this handed to us on a silver platter. So I think that this is something actually that we need to talk about. We need to basically address the concept of this, the subsidy trap with local governments to make sure that they stop forcing, artists and activists to be able to make a choice between harnessing business versus being true to their craft. You know, and also on the business side, I mean, I think we need to like lose the silos. We need to start basically creating more partnerships, with the more creative among us, because we need to understand that if we're going to produce anything of value for the world, that we need to embrace this. One of the things also with incubators that I think that we don't pay enough attention to is that many incubators have a financial conflict of interest. Now, what I mean by this is that the business model of the majority of business incubators is to take equity in their startups. However, this influences what they're teaching. Now, I can illustrate this as follows. So I mentioned Amsterdam Center for Entrepreneurship that incubated Radically Open Security. So I partnered with ACE. ACE is a very open-minded incubator because they are government funded and also because they're affiliated with the university system. So I've been teaching classes on post-growth entrepreneurship. In fact, coincidentally, even yesterday, I spoke to one of their cohorts in their Ready to Scale program. I've also given lectures during their startup boot camps, and basically just telling them about post-growth entrepreneurship and other new forms of social entrepreneurship. Very, everyone's always very appreciative of it. Not everyone agrees with me, but a lot of people most certainly appreciate the input so they can make better informed decisions moving forward with their startups. Now, I went to a commercial incubator, who will not be named, and I said to them, "Hey, so dear commercial incubator, I'm giving these classes at ACE, and I'm happy to do the same for you, completely free of charge. I'm not going to charge you a cent for it. All I want to do is talk to your founders about new forms of social entrepreneurship." Said commercial incubator thought about it, and they said, "Well, we really appreciate the offer, but there's a problem here. The problem is that our investors are investment banks, like Merrill Lynch. And to be quite honest, I'm not really sure that they'll like what you have to say. So I'm sorry, but we have to politely decline." So this is a very clear case in which the business model of the incubator is directly impacting what is being taught in this incubator. And they're refusing to teach more social, ideas about social entrepreneurship just quite simply because it comes into conflict with their business model. I think we need to address similar concerns also with business schools because, many business schools receive endowments from their alumni. And, this also, of course, has an influence on the content that is being taught in the business school. There's actually a very interesting article from a business school professor named Martin Parker, and it's called Bulldoze the Business School. And it's a bit of a funny name for an article, but it's basically where he's talking about how much ideology is actually embedded into business schools, and the funny thing is, slowly there is a discourse that is starting to happen about reforming business education. Another story that I can tell you, um, Occupy Wall Street, if you all remember them, they organized a walkout of EC10, the Introduction to Economics class of Professor Gregory Mankiw from Harvard University. They sat in the front row, and then the students stood up, and then they said, "We do not want the ideology that you are teaching in this class." And then they walked out. So what these students were saying was that there is embedded ideology in the economics education, and that they started after this walkout student societies, one of which is called Reinventing Economics. There's also others like the Post-Crash Economic Society. The whole point of these student societies was to start a discourse about economics education and talking about the fact that, only classical economics are being taught in the business schools. Whereas, we know by now that, externalities actually don't exist and that, we don't all behave like rational economic men, nor should we. And, there are other alternate streams of economics that should also be taught as part of the modern curriculum to help us face modern day challenges, because there are so many other forms of economics. I mean, you have, of course, Marxist economics, and you have feminist economics and ecological economics. And, there's so many alternative streams that barely receive any attention at all. Now, the question that I have is that why are there no walkouts from, the entrepreneurship departments? And why are there no walkouts from our incubators? Because they share exactly the same problem. However, there really is, at this given moment in time, no discourse that's happening about the fact that we need to reinvent entrepreneurship education. The furthest that we get is impact incubators. So things like, the impact hubs of the world. But the problem, though, is that these impact incubators are clinging to exactly the same model that we've gotten from Silicon Valley. In other words, capital, scale, exit. So, but it's just we have a slightly different variation on it. We have impact investment, scale maybe a little bit slower, and, still have an exit, which ultimately I think, with the impact ecosystem does not necessarily get us as far as we need to go. So, there's very little discussion all around about bootstrapping, which I think, is actually very important for entrepreneurs in being able to actually maintain our autonomy. And also, other questions about things like scaling, exponential growth. I'm sorry, pardon my cat here. um, so basically, just, we need to start questioning what is being taught in these entrepreneurship programs, because there are so many questions that we don't ask, like why exponential curves? The first time you get into a startup boot camp, that is the first thing you're going to see, an explanation of why your business, needs that to make that exponential curve, and how you need to basically construct a story, preferably to to pitch to investors, about why you're going to scale exponentially from 3 to 5 years, so you can then exit. Um, those of you who are already savvy, in venture capital are going to know this story already. We tend to want to aspire to become what is called a unicorn. So in other words, a company with $1 billion valuation. But I think we need to change the terms here. Let's stop calling them unicorns and let's start calling them battery chickens, because that's exactly what it is. You are basically artificially force feeding investment capital to a startup so that they can sort of plump up and look really juicy and attractive, and this is, that exponential growth for 3 to 5 years. And then once they're sort of plump and juicy enough, then they essentially are led to their liquidation, AKA the exit, which is basically when, the financial value is pulled out of the company. All the while, because they're growing off of investment capital, they are revenue negative, cash flow negative, which is completely not surprising. If you start from day one, hiring, you know, uh, there's no way that customer revenue is actually going to be able to keep pace with the rate at which you're hiring. And of course, people also are the most expensive things that are out there. So basically, the point that I'm trying to make here is that you're whether or not you actually have a solid value proposition and whether or not you have a solid business model starts to become sort of besides the point. Whether or not your revenue, whether or not your cash flow negative, if you can turn yourself into an attractive, quote unquote, acqui-hire, in other words, being able to get yourself acquired by a larger entity, or, if if you can manage a successful IPO, then at that point, your lack of a business model is no longer your problem. And then basically, as the founders and the investors, we can basically get out with whatever we earn, based upon the acquisition or the IPO price. And then also, in a way, it's kind of like pulling a pump and dump scheme on the public markets with these revenue losing companies. We saw this most prominently with WeWork, which was sort of the most egregious example of a revenue losing unicorn, in which they were spending revenue 5 times as quickly as they were gaining it, with sort of overpriced co-working locations. But, also many other so-called successful Silicon Valley unicorns, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, all of these, oftentimes they have their IPOs, and then what happens? Whoever bought the stock loses money, because this system only works in a growth economy. As long as the economy is growing and continues growing, then it'll be fine. But the moment that something happens, like say a COVID-19 crisis, in which, back in March, the stock market loses a third of its value, it's always the final investor that's left holding the bag. And oftentimes that final investor just so happens to be, those little Robin Hood investors that, are speculating and just trying to earn a buck off of this. And most of them don't even understand really what's going on in this model anyways. So honestly, I have questions whether or not performing this, this kind of pump and dump scheme on the public markets with a revenue losing, cashing out shell organization should even be legal, but okay, this is, a discussion. There's some really good books that talk about this kind of thing in more detail. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Douglas Rushkoff, but he writes some really amazing books. One particular book that I think is awesome that everyone should read is called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. He also has a second book, by the way, that is called Team Human, that also I would highly recommend. But I think that Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus particularly should be required reading for anyone who is even thinking about starting a business. So, and I think in general, we need to be asking questions, about what we're doing with business. I mean, the way in which we are using them as vehicles for financial extraction. One of the things that I like to ask people about the business that they're starting is, to imagine for a moment, what if business was one of the most uh, effective forms of activism? And what if you could use business as a mixed media for art? What if you could use business as a vehicle for your spirituality? Or what if you could use business as a vehicle of creative expression? There's nothing stopping us from looking at business this way. Business doesn't, by definition, have to be about maximizing shareholder value. This is sort of neoliberalistic baggage that has it's come to accumulate. But if you think about it as at its essence, business does not have to be anything more than a group of people working together to get things done in a financially sustainable fashion. That's it. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. You know, and if you start to dig into this, you find really interesting things. For example, thinking about business as art or business as a form of self-expression, you could think about business as a hero's journey, a la Joseph Campbell, you know, in which you tend to have a hero, a protagonist, and then they go on a mission, and then they, meet a mentor, and then they find an obstacle, and this is the kind of story that you find in almost every single theater piece. Now the question is, as an entrepreneur, we are writing our own script of our hero's journey of entrepreneurship. And the question is, what kind of a story do we want to tell? This isn't a story that we're telling with words, but this is a story that we tell through our actions. And what we can ask, how can we find dramatic unity between the overall mission, so basically of this journey that we're on, and the everyday operational decisions that we make in running our business? Yeah, this is one way that we can view this. We're very rarely, of course, encouraged to think about it this way. Also, business as a form of spirituality. This is also, at first blush, people would say, well, what does religion have to do with business? Well, actually quite a bit, if you think about it. For example, if you look at Eastern texts, things like Buddhist texts, Taoist texts, there's actually very much in the Tao Te Ching that talks about leaders. There's actually a really great book by John Hyder that is called The Tao of Leadership, and it actually translates the different verses of the Tao Te Ching into a number of leadership principles, including, I can't quote it verbatim, but I think it was something about, the best leader is the one that steps back, and the people then say, but I did this by myself. There's actually very much that we can take out of this. Which I think is much better leadership training than what we tend to get in business schools, where we learn how to be assertive and we learn how to be overly self-confident. Because I think, ironically enough, sometimes the traits that we're taught in business schools about how to be a leader is actually the opposite of what we probably do need to be a successful leader. Because sometimes empathy, is more important than being able to communicate assertively. Same things with nonviolent communications, nonviolent communication, like from Marshall Rosenberg, vulnerability. I don't know if you know Brene Brown and her excellent series of books, but she also has a book called Dare to Lead, in which she talks about how there is no courage without vulnerability. And oftentimes as a founder, when things tend to go wrong, quite simply, it's because we're overconfident, and too assertive, rather, or maybe because we're not listening enough. And it's a completely different set of qualities, I think, that we need to be learning, and also that even business schools, I think, are responsible to be teaching us. But this is not what we're getting in this education. Also, there's other interesting ideas in religion about business. For example, there is a concept of usury in the Bible, actually, and it comes in the three major world religions: Judaism, Christianity, as well as Buddhism. This is actually really a big deal. Interest-bearing loans, so basically interest-bearing debt. Uh, this is actually almost, they say the love of money is the root of all evil. In Christianity, if you think about the story of Jesus with the money changers, Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple because they were basically, charging interest-bearing, well, they were basically charging extra on top of that money that they were changing, and he basically thought this was sort of defiling the temple district, and he threw them out. You've got the similar concepts in the Quran. You have, for example, Islamic banks in some parts of the world, which interestingly enough, yeah, these banks actually don't permit interest or certainly or interest rates in either case above a particular rate that they find proportionally. Also in Judaism, you have similar concepts. Um, the funny thing is that all of this growth that we are dependent on, this actually all comes back to this concept of usury, this whole concept of interest-bearing debt. There's a really interesting story from an economist, and his name is Bernard Lietaer. And the story is called The Parable of the 11th Round. So here's how it goes. There was a village in the outback, and in this village, they had a market, and they exchanged animals. So they had cows, and they had horses, and they had chickens. Now, one day, a stranger showed up with white shoes and with a white hat and with shiny shoes. And the stranger looked at all of these poor people, carrying around animals, and he said, "Oh, how primitive!" If you could, what you guys should do, I have a much easier way for you to do this. So bring me a cowhide, and then come back tomorrow, and I'll have a solution for you to be able to do things easier. So they come back the next day, and the stranger had cut coins out of this cowhide. He called them rounds. And he said, well, what I'm going to do is that, let's say that there's 10 families. I'm going to give each of these families 10 rounds. And what you can then do is go back to the market tomorrow, and you can exchange these rounds with each other. Let's say that each round is worth one chicken, and now you can basically just do it with these coins rather than having to carry chickens around. That's so much easier. So they took the rounds, and then they went to the market, and they started exchanging the rounds, and and it worked. And they went back to the stranger, and they said, "Wow, this is fantastic! Thank you so much. We're grateful. What can we do to thank you for this?" So the stranger said, "Well, okay, if you want to thank me, here's what we can do. I'm going to come back in 1 year from now. When I come back, I want each of you to give me an 11th round back." Yeah, at that point, the villagers looked a bit confused, and they were like, "Yeah, but where are we supposed to get that 11th round from?" And the stranger said, "Just you wait. You'll see." So at this point, the villagers had three options. One option was essentially, when the stranger came back in a year, to default and just say, "Well, we're not going to pay him back." The second option was to exclude, basically cut out one of the 10 families, because if you took those rounds from the 10th family, then each of the 9 families would have 11 rounds, and then the last family would only have 1 round. So basically, only one family would have to default rather than all of them. Or the third option was quite simply to breed more chickens, since each of the rounds was worth one chicken. So they decided, well, we don't want to hurt anyone, so let's go with the third option. So what happened is the stranger came back after a year, and then each of the families, 10 families, had the 11 rounds. And, the stranger was happy, everyone was happy, and he said, "Great, well, this is absolutely fantastic. Let's do this again next year, and the year after, and the year after again." At a certain point, something funny started happening. Everyone kept breeding more and more chickens. And at a certain point, everyone started eating chicken. And, there were, at a certain point, they had enough feather pillows and, there was chicken poop all over the place. They were starting to say, yeah, but, we don't actually need any more chickens. We've got enough chickens. So what's going on here? Now, in this parable, what wound up happening is the stranger introduced interest-bearing debt into the system. In other words, this usury, and also in other words, extraction. Um, as soon as this was introduced into the system, it required growth of their economy. In other words, raising more chickens in order to be able to keep up with the interest rate that the stranger was giving them. And essentially this is sort of a never-ending cycle. Now, this is what explains, the never-ending growth in the societies that we currently live in. If you think about GDP, gross domestic product, which is looking at national economies, this always needs to be up and to the right. The moment that our GDP starts flattening off, what happens? It's, layoffs, recession, suffering. But why is this the case? It's the case because there's so much extraction happening from our economy that we need to continue growing just to maintain a steady state. However, this growth puts pressure on our planet, and this growth puts pressure on our economies. And I think we're starting to understand by now that this is not sustainable forever. So this leads to post-growth economics, which is basically starting to ask the question of, well, how can we actually be able to flatten the economy without having bad things happen? And given, the fact that we are getting into a period, most certainly with COVID, in which we can no longer count on never-ending growth of our economy, I think that, these kinds of questions are becoming more relevant than ever. Another thing also is that if you think, coming back to the story with the villagers and the chickens, what wound up happening was that this extraction from their system, this interest-bearing debt, this also fostered an atmosphere of competition. See, before the stranger came, each of the families were willing to cooperate and help each other. If there was a bad year, these families would, band together, give resources to each other. But of course, what wound up happening was, as soon as cutting out one family provided a advantage to the other families, that cooperation started reducing. Another thing also is that with the need to grow, it always comes at the expense of something else. There are no externalities in a system. Things are always, growth is always coming from somewhere. Whether it's the planet, whether it's our societies, those resources that we're monetizing have to come from somewhere. And the thing is that, oftentimes in growing the monetized economy, we are looking for something to monetize. And 9 times out of 10, that either is something that currently belongs to the commons, or it's some kind of human relationship, non-monetized human relationship, something we just do for each other that, we just try and find some way to intermediate it and find a business model for it. And again, coming back to startup incubators, they call this innovation, right? If you're innovating, then what you're doing is, they will tell you, find something in the world or find some human relationship and then find ways that you can, facilitate this and then charge a margin on it. This is precisely what we're being taught. But this is also the problem, because the more we start monetizing the commons, the more we're starting to reduce it, and it's the usual, of course, the most prominent commons, of course, is our natural environment, the planet, forests and oil and, natural resources. And of course, this is finite. We can't, monetize the commons forever. And also with human relationships, this is what we need, especially to be resilient in times where our economy is dropping, as it currently is, But at the same time, also, we're seeing this disconnect right now during the COVID crisis between Wall Street and Main Street. And it's becoming incredibly obvious how, this perpetual pump and dump scheme, how disconnected this actually is from the actual stores, and small businesses that we're actually running. That's sort of keeping the world going. So I think another question that we need to ask is how can we use business as an instrument for degrowth? And by degrowth, what I mean is that we can actually take the monetized economy and then remove, resources from that ecosystem. So basically take cash out of the monetized economy and redirect that towards rebuilding the commons or by recreating non-monetized human relationships. So these are questions that nobody's asking. And the thing is, we need incubators that teach this too. So, I've been trying also myself to, create new places in which this can be taught. Uh, I've been working on a methodology that's called post-growth entrepreneurship. So it's basically taking the concepts of the post-growth economists and then translating that a layer of abstraction down into the entrepreneurship level. Because of course, an economy is a meta concept, right? But it's the entrepreneurs that we are implementing, the businesses that the economy is composed of. So we can't know how to build a post-growth economy until we know how to build post-growth companies. So 2.5 years ago, I created a post-growth startup incubator called Nonprofit Ventures. And I've been using this to develop educational materials. So I've been I created a pilot class actually at the Free University of Amsterdam in their business school. And I taught it to 40 students to very good reviews. And at this point, post-growth entrepreneurship is now worth 6 European credit points in their business school at the Free University of Amsterdam. I'm also working right now with the University of Amsterdam to basically create a MOOC, so basically an online version of the same class to put it online. They have a Coursera account, and we're hoping, to be able to put this up on Coursera. So we've already filmed a pilot video, and we're working on, creating this MOOC. It's not ready yet. It's going to take us probably, I would say, maybe another 6 months at least. To be able to get this to the point where we can launch it. But in either case, this is another ongoing project that we're working on education-wise. Also in March of this past year, I also created a post-growth startup incubator. I'm sorry, not the incubator, a post-growth startup bootcamp. And we had 13 founders and also 5 organizers. And it was a 1-week thing on the island of Terschelling, which is basically this little Dutch island with beaches and dunes and forests, basically a really pretty idyllic location. And what we did is this startup bootcamp was a combination between a personal development retreat and a startup bootcamp. So, we did things during this startup bootcamp like meditation, 15 minutes before breakfast, 15 minutes before dinner. We did morning writing, something called the morning pages. So I'm not sure if you all are familiar with a book that's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. She has a number of tools in this book, including artist dates, but morning pages is the largest tool, and it's 30 minutes of longhand stream of consciousness writing first thing in the morning. And it's meant essentially for clearing out blocks, sort of mental blocks in your head, sort of caging your monkey mind and being able to promote creativity. If it sounds a bit wishy-washy, I'm just saying, hold your skepticism and try it. Because a lot of the ideas also that I've had with my own business and with post-growth entrepreneurship also came from me from following this process. Similarly, we did things like walks on the beach, anyway, this is what I was saying about personal development retreat. On the other hand, we were also there to work. So these students were here, these founders were here to build actual startups. So they were filling out business model canvases this week. They were creating value propositions, validating market assumptions, basically, preparing a final presentation. At the end, unlike other startup boot camps, they were not pitching for a panel of investors, but rather they were actually sort of, presenting for each other. So rather than, trying to compete with one another, so you can sort of the investors could select a winner. Rather, it's more that they were just trying to say, well, this is the assistance that I need. And they were trying to create collaborative platforms amongst themselves so that by working together, that all of their startups could could move forward. So, this was effective. And what wound up happening is several startups, post-growth startups, were launched in the course of this week. For example, Alexander Medic, who works for the AIDS Fonds in the Netherlands, he created a startup that week called Disrupt Development, which is essentially a business consultancy company for NGOs. And he also has the same not-for-profit business model as Radically Open Security. Also, another example of a startup that started that week was XenoLearn by Claire Lunessen. And this is a educational material development company that is also creating basically materials like educational materials against racism and xenophobia. So she's been doing revenue producing events to support things like Black Lives Matter. This is absolutely fantastic. And by creating these new kinds of startup boot camps, then it's not just like theory, where we're just talking about, new ideas and new ways of doing it, but we are starting new companies, with actual books that can be analyzed, and flesh and blood people that are creating new products and services, and we can create this post-growth economy, one startup at a time, and people don't necessarily need to so-called believe in it. I mean, it just takes a small number of like-minded people who decide that they want to do this. And this creates employment opportunity, which takes, some of the less idealistic people along with us. If you think about it, this post-growth ecosystem can exist, in parallel with the commercial ecosystem. So it's not one or the other. We can have both at the same time. But thinking about this concept of, social businesses or, giving all of our dividend to charity, imagine just for one moment if somebody created a post-growth accountancy firm, that were able to have even a fraction of the size of, Accenture, Ernst & Young, KPMG, Deloitte. Imagine if you donated the profits of that to a foundation. If we did this here in the Netherlands, I think that we would have enough profits to be able to single-handedly fund a universal basic income pilot in the entire Netherlands, and think about how much that would change things. So anyway, I hope that this is all food for thought, and I would be more than happy to take some questions from you all.
Thank you, Melanie. And it was really hard getting you to share some thoughts. I mean, you win the award for the only person who's been able to hold everyone's attention for the entire hour. So thank you so much with that. If there are any questions, just post them here on the right-hand side. People were quite impressed with what you were saying. Some of them, you were actually describing what they were doing. I had a question for you. When you started, you bootstrapped, as you were saying, but at a certain time, we got 40 staff, you got COVID coming up now. Who is financing? Who did finance you if you needed external capital?
So we never needed external capital. I mean, we're a consultancy company. So, we're set up as a platform of freelancers. So basically, that has enabled us to be very flexible. So when COVID first hit, a number of our customers were distracted. I mean, that's completely understandable because, they just needed to get their teleconferencing and their VPNs working, and they weren't thinking about doing penetration tests and security audits at that time. So what happened is we're a network of freelancers, and we're a platform essentially. So in that sense, a similar kind of platform as Uber, Airbnb. So what happens is when you work with freelancers, if let's say customer demand drops by 50%. If you have people on internal contract, then you have to fire half the people because that's the only way to be able to cut your costs to handle that 50% drop. But if you have freelancers, then what happens is each of the freelancers basically goes from 100% of their income down to 50% of their income. Now, this is a lot less catastrophic for a person because a drop from 100% income down to 0% income is catastrophic. But a drop from 100% income down to 50% income, I mean, especially for our security professionals who anyway are a bit overpaid to begin with just because we're in a pretty hot industry. I mean, look, if you drop from 100,000 a year down to 50,000 a year, I mean, yeah, you're not going to be happy about it, but most likely you're still going to be able to pay your mortgage and be able to put some food on the table. It just means maybe you'll go on holiday a little bit less. Okay, COVID broke the world, so we're not going on holiday anyway. But the point is that, I mean, it didn't last too long, and at a certain point, the security requests picked up again, just because for compliance reasons, security audits need to happen anyway, so they want to, and plus more things are going online now, so ironically enough, my company now is busier than it was this time last year, and which is explainable by the fact that all this new stuff is going online. So I'm very lucky that I'm in one of the business sectors that I think hasn't been very heavily affected by COVID-19. Maybe other companies have had a different experience, but this has been my experience. So the truth is, we have never needed funding. Once actually twice, I needed a cash flow loan, which I got from the NLNet Foundation, which is basically the foundation we're donating our profits to. Twice, I took a loan from them of 10,000 euros because of our 30-day payment terms. We've got some customers that pay us after 60 days, and then we pay our staff within 30 days, which of course does cause really large cash flow swings. When we were basically a scale up around year 2, year 3, there were a few times we dipped into the red, and then we got a loan that to cover that period, and I paid back that loan quickly. It was an interest-free loan, but basically that was it. We have had no extra funding, and we've needed no extra funding. And for companies basically with a service-based business model, I don't think you actually need funding. You don't need financing. And I think it's one of those ideologies that's taught to us by business schools and incubators that they claim that we do need financing. I think that you can use services to bootstrap products, and you can use products to bootstrap ecosystems. And it takes more patience, and it takes a certain amount of lateral thinking. But I think that's also one of those ideologies that we need to question, that finance is necessarily required to be able to start and run a successful company.
Okay. Jennifer had a question. Ari, the 1% being shareholders is also pensions, and the latter is often rolled out as a reason for keeping economic models as they are with shareholders and with being paramount. How do you feel that transitioning?
Okay, let's see, pensions. So here's the thing. I mean, the pension, what we're doing with pensions anyway is kind of gambling. Because again, if we start going into a non-growth economy, basically into a recession anyway, these pension funds get less. There's also so much extraction coming from these pension companies that I don't believe that necessarily this is the most helpful way of being able to support individuals. It's exactly what I said before about having a post-growth economy support a universal basic income. I know that not everybody agrees with the idea of a universal basic income. I mean, certainly in the United States, there's a lot of people that will say, yeah, but why do we let people be lazy? But I think that if people have their financial needs taken care of, I think that they'll be more likely to want to start these kinds of weird nonprofit companies, which I think ultimately would be, in the benefit of us all. So I think that this is probably the way to be able to sort of break the cycle. If we can, create universal basic incomes, that would negate the need for a pension because basically everybody is getting a payment. And then once people are freed from the rat race of working for commercial business and jobs that they don't care about, I think that they would start putting themselves towards more meaningful activities. I think a number of people would want to be entrepreneurs for the sake of being an entrepreneur. Because once again, it was what I was saying about a hero's journey. I mean, I think this can be a true expression of ourselves. And ultimately, I think most entrepreneurs, if we are living in more certain conditions, we want to use our businesses to leave a legacy. I mean, to be what we can leave behind. And, I think this is also the reason why, for serial entrepreneurs, oftentimes, the first time they do it for the money, and the second time they do it for meaning and for purpose. So I think once our basic needs are taken care of, then I think it's a lot easier for people to say, well, okay, this time around, I want to do something better for the world. I understand this doesn't apply to everybody. People who are in a desperate situation financially are not going to be in the position to do this. However, it only takes a small number of like-minded leaders to create these post-growth initiatives, and then we create the employment opportunity to be able to take everyone else along. And then those people who perhaps can't afford themselves to be able to bootstrap a company because they don't have enough in their savings account, but they can afford to choose a social employer rather than a commercial employer. And I think all things being equal, if they can earn the same salary at a post-growth company rather than at a commercial company, I mean, Lord knows why would they not choose for that? I think the majority of the people in the world are good. This is what I believe. And I believe if you offer people the choice to be able to do something good versus doing something potentially harmful, I think people will consistently choose to do that thing that's good. It just takes a few of us in privileged positions, to be able to make other choices and to decide that it's a priority for us to reform entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education, to ask these questions in a public way, and to be brave enough to start companies that are for, pure positive impact rather than just for our own personal benefit. And I do believe that there's enough people out there that are willing to try this.
I agree. There are plenty. I mean, we've been doing it for 24 years, so there are plenty out there. Have you ever turned down a client
Oh yeah,
because they
for sure.
represent your values, even though they might be a well-paying client?
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a pretty stringent ethics policy, so we won't work with intelligence agencies. I've also, there's also we basically classify our customers into what we call black hat, white hat, and gray hat. So black hat customers are customers that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. So this is things like intelligence agencies, zero-day vendors. I mean, basically anybody doing things that are either blatantly illegal or things that we just don't agree with fundamentally. We've got white hat customers, which are basically customers that we think are fine, but we're going to evaluate their requests on case by case basis. And then we've got gray hat customers, which are sort of like, well, okay, they're doing a few things that we disagree with, but they're also doing other things that we like. So we're gonna, we're basically, and we do work for those customers. However, we refuse to sign an NDA, so we can basically justify our participation, our involvement with them later if we have to. And we also only do work if it contributes to the open source. So in other words, we will do work that is funded by them if it makes the world more equal, but not if it makes the world less equal. And an example of a gray hat customer that we've worked with is the Dutch National Police. They do offensive hacking that we disagree with, but we also believe that police are necessary for the public order. So, we've done things for them, like, for example, developing an open source basic security awareness training that basically went up on our GitHub repository, and it's available for free for everyone. And, we need to be pragmatic, too. It's kind of like how Tor is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, you can feel how you want about the Department of Defense, but I consider that also a gray hat customer. So, and we basically evaluate those kinds of things on a case-by-case basis.
But you said that you work for the financial sector, banks, to test their security systems, their firewalls, and things like that. Do you make a distinction between the banks? Will you work for I don't know, you work for ASN Bank, but you want to work for JP Morgan?
Yeah. So far, we've worked for Tritos, and we have also worked for what are they called again? CNAB. So those are the two banks actually so far that we've worked for. That being said, we work for A Home too, and that's definitely one of those big commercial, you know. So the thing is, we've asked those questions, and in the end, have decided consciously to not have a policy, a customer policy as strict as say Triodos Bank, and it's for the following reason: if you have, let's say I have a bank account at ABN AMRO in the Netherlands, and let's say hypothetically speaking that they're hacked and they have a data breach. Who's going to suffer for this? Is it going to be the bank or is it going to be the people? I don't want to have it on my conscience that a whole bunch of consumers, I mean, people, you and me, that we have our data spread all over the dark web because I refused to give service to a bank in helping them to make their security posture better. So
Mm.
I think in this particular case, I find it justified. Same thing with utility companies, because we also work with some power companies like Tenet and Eneco and Staten. I would have to think twice about Shell. They've never approached us, but nonetheless, with those kind of energy grid companies, I mean, I see a lot of reasons to be able to protect them. I mean, one of those apocalypse scenarios actually is if the power grid goes down. There's a really great book called The Knowledge, which actually starts out with a portrait of what would happen if the energy grid goes down. And the too long didn't read version of it is basically that the entire society crumbles and turns into one tremendous anarchy, and we go back to primitive living conditions. And the whole book, The Knowledge, is trying to encapsulate the knowledge we would need to be able to rebuild society from scratch if such a scenario were to happen. This is why I would work with the energy companies because I don't want society to crumble, and I can feel how I want, about power companies, but I think that I'm also on the right side of things to be helping them as well.
And are we vulnerable? Is the energy sector in Europe vulnerable for going down?
Of course. Yeah, terribly. I mean, everything's vulnerable. There is no secure software. There are no secure systems. There are no secure companies, no organizations. Radically Open Security, my company, is also not secure. Secure doesn't exist. So, what we have is a set of trade-offs that we make. If you think about, say, credit cards, there are so many different ways that we can, conduct fraud with a credit card. However, we have social and business backups. So basically, if I notice credit card fraud, all I have to do is call up the credit card company and then say, hey, could you please reverse this transaction? And I know as a consumer that they're going to do this. So this is what lowers the risk to an acceptable level for me as a consumer. So, it's always this trade-off between risks and benefits, and it's also the same with this.
Okay. And what is the big ambition of your organization? Proving that post-growth businesses can be successful, or is it to have 1,000 hackers helping you? What?
Yeah. When most people say, where do you want to see radically open security in 10 years? My answer is, I don't care. I mean, honestly, I view growth as a threat. That is, because if you grow, you have to hire the correct staff. You have to maintain the integrity culturally of your company. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Ironically enough, though, by not focusing on growth and rather by focusing on other things like integrity and maintaining a good experience for customers, for staff members, for society, ironically enough, that's caused us to grow, and I think more than if we had been focused upon growth. Just quite simply because we have a better value proposition for everybody who's involved. That being said, I want to grow as slowly as I have to maintain that integrity. And beyond that, I actually really don't care. I believe in decentralization. I believe in distribution. I would rather that there are 100 other little companies like Radically Open Security that pop up, in the same space. The market's big enough for all of us, and I would rather have a lifestyle company that works for me, that I know I can maintain the integrity of. That to me is more important, and that's why I'm moving my focus onto post-growth entrepreneurship. I don't want a ginormous, company. That's really not what I'm going for. I would far rather help to create a distributed network of post-growth companies that can form a coherent ecosystem.
And is it easy working with all these nerds?
I think so, because I'm a really big nerd myself. But
And
they're still here.
how many women work at your of the 40 staff?
Not enough. Security is a really male-dominated area. We have a few women, most particularly on our project management teams and on our infrastructure teams. I've had female pen testers in the past, but they're few and far between. I've done a lot of work with like women in cybersecurity organizations. I'm also the co-founder of the Dutch Girl Geek Dinner, so I've done quite a bit of work. I also led an all-female capture the flag team that trained up for the Hack in the Box CTF for 2 years. So I'm very involved in those kinds of efforts because I think we need to promote more women in security. But the problem is, just quite simply, it's hard to hire what isn't there.
And um, I just lost my train of thought. Um, have you ever worked on creating a secure smartphone app for voting?
No, I have not. But if you have any great ideas, I'd love to take it with you
Well, I
offline.
was really surprised that everything is digitized except voting.
Yeah.
When they say, well, you can go online, you go online to get a ballot, it's just mailed to you. Why is it so difficult to make a secure voting system where people can
Yeah.
vote at their leisure?
To be honest, I'm extremely suspicious about online voting.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of really great research over the last, certainly at least 20 years. I mean, look up, for example, like Ed Felton. There's been a number of really great, attempts at both hacking voting machines as well as trying to build more secure voting machines. And I think the consensus from the academic security community after 20 years of research is just that it's a very, very, very difficult thing to pull off. Um, I trust the honestly, paper and pencil. I know that also has its own set of problems. In the end, it comes back to the trade-offs that I was explaining before. But there's a really interesting story. There's a hacker, a Dutch hacker, whose name is Rob Honkrijp. He founded one of the largest hosting providers called Access for All in the Netherlands. That was acquired, and is a long story that I don't want to go into. But Rob, at one point, he created this association that was called Wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet. So in English, we don't trust voting computers. And he called them voting computers rather than voting machines to basically make the point that voting machines are just computers, and you can program them and you can get them to do anything you want. So what he did is that together with a journalist, they managed to borrow a voting machine, and he basically pulled out the EEPROM, reprogrammed it, put it back, and he basically taught the voting machine how to play chess. He made a YouTube video of all of this. And then in the YouTube video, he basically ended with the question, if I can teach a voting machine how to play chess, what else can I have it do?
Brilliant. Brilliant. No one has any questions. Everyone is still actually around and not going to the networking part. This is quite unusual. Thomas has one question. Go ahead, post your question, Thomas. All right, but while you're typing that, what can we do to help you?
One what could you do to help me? I think that anybody, first of all, who finds this interesting, I would love to talk to you. So please connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. For me, I mean, now that COVID has kind of decimated conferences, it's sort of the only way that I can have a decent hallway track, is by having you connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can basically set up a video call or something like that. I would love to hear from all of you. What questions do you have? What did you think about this presentation? Can you think of any ideas or collaborations, or do you want to start a post-growth company, or, do you want to participate with nonprofit ventures, any of these things, or do you want a pen test that Radically Open Security can do for you? That too. Please just reach out to me. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing also is, if you're involved with things like business incubators, we're providing things like guest lectures, also educational resources. So if you're involved with an incubator and you'd like to work some of these ideas into your existing incubator, I would love to partner with you to try and, get some of these ideas, into your existing vehicle. Similarly, if you work for, say, a corporation or a multinational, and you would like to think about ways to use your corporation or multinational to support a post-growth economy, I can talk to me about that too, because there's a lot of very sensible changes that we can make. Things like introducing social procurement policies. There's different ways that I think we can leverage multinationals. Also, looking at how you spin off startups. What kind of startups you might be spinning off. There's definitely ways that we can leverage that as well. Also, if you work for an NGO and you think, wow, cool, I really wish I had a post-growth company that was sending its dividends to me. Can you help me start one? Again, reach out to me. I can give you some brainstorming or some advice about this kind of a thing. Even if you're up in politics or in government and you want to know how can I add this as talking points, or lobby points, or to our platform, prior to some election. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you too. I mean, so basically, I think no matter who you are, or even if you're an investor and you think, well, okay, I'm offended by half the things you're saying, but I still want to know what kind of a role can I play moving forward. I mean, maybe you think I'm obsolete, but how can I take my good intentions and still manage to do something with the position I'm in? Talk to me too.
I have a question. How do you see the investor relations in terms? Thomas was asking, how do you see the investor relations in terms of extractive economy, i.e. to avoid the negative extraction? If you do not pay dividends, does the motivation fall apart?
Depends on the person. I think some impact investors probably really care about the impact, and maybe they care about the impact more than they care about the returns. And I think, those who are wealthy, they know they're in a good position. I mean, oftentimes rich people at a certain point turn to philanthropy anyway. In a way, it's kind of like, paying off, your conscience for all of the commercial things you did earlier on. I think that there's a lot of people with money who, I think that they would care about doing things for impact and for meaning this time around. So I think investors most certainly can play a role also in starting this kind of a ecosystem. But I mean, I would love to also have input from investors to try and think about also how we can leverage you. But I would rather leverage you than your capital. But that being said, I mean, I still think we can leverage your networks. I think we can leverage your energy. We can leverage your knowledge and expertise. There's plenty that we can leverage without, having capital with strings attached. And it could even be that maybe if we think about it more, maybe interest-free loans or something, even for things like getting, helping post-growth companies get through a cash flow crisis. But I'm always a little bit hesitant with loans, because loans are yet another form of sort of a big pot of money that I think, and anytime people have a big pot of money, whether it's from a loan or, VC or angel or crowdfunding or subsidy or whatever, I think that it pulls you, it distracts you from your product market fit. So, I think it's actually better for most companies to actually not have that. But I realize not everyone in the world is going to want to go this direction, or will agree with me.
Dorothy from Hong Kong was actually doing what you were talking about. She was asking, do you think we can change the entire economic system, or change the system bit by bit, bottom up? So much based on the other question, can we change the asset preservation mindset of asset owners?
Yeah. So it's not going to happen overnight, and we certainly can't expect it to. I think bottom up is really the only way. It starts, and we have to think about it in terms of crossing the chasm. It starts with the early adopters. We have to start by preaching to our own choir because there's quite a few people who are going to disagree with us, and we just shouldn't waste our time and energy on people who disagree to that extent.
Mm,
However, it only takes a small number of like-minded people to be able to create prototypes of these ideas. One post-growth company that's successful is an oddity. People can look at companies like, for example, Radically Open Security and say, okay, that's weird and interesting, but okay, it's obviously a corner case. You know, 10 post-growth companies, and then people start thinking, oh, okay, well, it's still kind of weird and still an oddity, but maybe there's something here. 100 post-growth companies, and now suddenly you have a movement. And once you've got these 100 post-growth companies, that's when they're going to start writing it into the business, into the entrepreneurship curriculum, and they're going to start talking about it at incubators. And once we create that change from the bottom up, top down will also start reacting to the discourse and reacting to the the turn of events. But the main thing is, talking is not what's going to convince the skeptics. We need to build it. We need to show them. We need to have data scientists crunch our numbers, so that they can see by pure practical experience that this is possible. Because until we actually demonstrate it, nobody's going to believe in the validity of what we're saying. And yes, this is going to take time, but this could also, as things go up from the bottom up with anything that's a viral idea, sometimes it can go faster than you think.
I also can confirm Melanie is quite accessible. I mean, sometimes you get connected to someone on LinkedIn and they don't respond, or they connect and you never hear back from them ever. That's not the case with Melanie. So when she says that, please reach out to her on LinkedIn, she will respond to you. I can confirm that. If there are no other questions, I mean, we've already gone way over time, but I'm really happily surprised to see that most of you are sticking around. For those of you who are taking 250 pages of notes, you don't have to do that because this is being taped. So you can always access the presentation afterwards. It takes like a day, and then they process the video, and you can access that anytime on your phone or on your desktop. Melanie, thank you very, very much. You've been a true inspiration, and unique that we went way over time, but you kept everyone's attention and you got the most applause ever. So thank you so much. And if there's anything that we can do to help you, please don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah. Well, I'm very grateful that you gave me the platform. So thank you so much, Robert.
No, it's brilliant what you're doing. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. And we'll see you next week with a completely different approach, but different, also a very interesting speaker, but a different track. We'll send you an invitation. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.